Good evening, obsessors, oppressors, and possessors. Welcome to a special episode of Ghosted in West Virginia. We have a lot of scares for you tonight. A personal story written by the creator and co-host of the show, Alec McCann. His wife is with him as always. Say hi to the folks, Jules. A little louder. All right. So tonight, we have the story of a good old-fashioned, good old creepy Black Forest haunting. Some of the voices you'll hear in this episode are provided by Jordan Smith, who plays Heinrich, Landon Wells, who is our very own Peter, Amber Stenson, who plays the old hag, and Brooke Stenson, who plays the daughter, and my very own wife, who plays... Actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, you play my wife. That's what you are. She's my wife. So, without further ado, let's jump into the story. The air was sharp with cold and whipping snow like rocks through the wind. In the Black Forest, two men were in the wilds hunting for food to feed their family on Christmas Day. Peter and his son-in-law Heinrich had agreed to hunt together on Christmas Eve so that they could get to know each other better. At least, that's what he had told his wife and daughter, but his real intentions were to lose him in the forest and say a pack of wolves had attacked them. He would say that Heinrich had died valiantly. All he had to do was get Heinrich turned around in the forest and abandon him to unfamiliar surroundings. The cold and nature would take care of the rest. But Peter's hatred for his daughter's husband had nothing to do with him, really, and everything to do with Peter's wife. He had heard her talking about Heinrich to her friend Ilsa. She was lusting after her daughter's husband. The rage he had felt over this was a cool, iced mountain cap, ever pointing towards the sky but slowly raising. He knew the lad could not help how his wife looked at him, but he couldn't let it stand. His family had broken up when Hilda, his daughter, had met Heinrich. Now, all that would be set right with minimal amount of guilt. He looked at Heinrich and gave him a small, reassuring smile.
Aye, 'tis a biting cold, and the clouds afford us little light. Yet, I possess a keen surety about this hunt. We must press deep into the wood, for the creatures are well acquainted with the habits of the hunting man. They will keep to the shadows.
He walked ahead of his son-in-law in darkness that was the Black Forest. The snow crunched under their feet with each step, signaling that man had come for game. They trudged over hills and frozen streams, neither man slowing nor talking as they walked. When 2 hours had passed, Heinrich finally spoke.
Forgive me, Peter, but whither precisely do we make our way?
We are bound for the heart of the forest. Once there, we shall part company, taking opposing flanks to cut off any flight.
They continued on, but something bothered Heinrich that Peter either didn't notice or wasn't talking about. There was no sound, no scurrying chipmunks, no winter birds chipping out their song, nothing.
It is eerie that no animals have made a sound. Not even an insect in this silence. Feel an air of bad omen here, Peter. Perhaps we should turn back.
Heinrich was extremely unnerved by the silence of the wood, but Peter, well, he was as stony as ever.
You lawyers in Strasbourg know not the ways of the wood. They are silent because they know we are here. It will remain that way until we have stopped moving.
That was the last they talked until they reached the spot Peter intended to lose Heinrich at. The sun had left its high abode and gave way to the moon's pale, ethereal light. Heinrich was even more concerned now because there was no sign of living creatures in the area.
Peter, when will we reach where we are going? I am perturbed by this silence. It is as if we are in the midst of a dead forest.
He looked over to Peter and saw something in his eyes he did not like. A certain emptiness that seemed devoid of any consequences.
It is not a dead wood, Heinrich. It is a cautious one. We will not find anything worth hunting if you will not keep quiet.
There was an edge to his voice that showed his frustrations towards Heinrich, and Heinrich decided not to press the issue. As Peter was about to say that they had reached where they needed to hunt, both men heard a baby crying in the distance through the thickness of the forest. Heinrich's heart climbed its way from his chest into his throat, and his breathing was harder to come by. He looked over to Peter, who had a smile on his face.
That is a good sign, Heinrich. It's a vixen scream. That's a red fox, boy. And where there is a red fox, there is game.
Peter then told Heinrich to go through the forest on the left, and he would approach on the right. Heinrich was nervous about walking through the woods alone, but would not allow his father-in-law to see that fear. The darkness and the sound of the fox had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. He had never expected to hear that sound out here. He walked a little further and the sound came again. It had changed. It was more intense and sounding out constantly. Heinrich had visions of a newborn lost out in the wilderness, hungry, cold, and they conjured themselves in his mind. Distressed and unnerved, Heinrich looked to see if he could see Peter through the trees, but only found a dark, empty space. He began to panic as the crying became the only sound in the forest until, from his right, he heard someone calling out to him.
Heinrich, come and behold.
This was strange, because it meant abandoning their premeditated plan if this was Peter. Peter didn't strike him as someone that would stray from his plan. The call came again, so Heinrich started for that direction. The air was getting thicker with a strange, suffocating cold humidity, and Heinrich found himself walking deeper and deeper as he progressed, taking deep and deeper breaths. He still couldn't see Peter, even though he was sure he should have by now. The call came from behind him and to the left. He whipped around in time to see the shadow of someone going behind the thick brambles. They seemed to be wearing horns. No, antlers. Strange. They were also wearing Peter's coat, but they seemed smaller and bent from age. He called out to the figure, called out for Peter, asking if he was okay. But as soon as the words left his lips, the shape was gone. Once again, he heard Peter call his name, but this time it came from a far distance, in a direction that he was supposed to go. Fear seized Heinrich's heart as he looked towards the direction of the call, and trepidatiously, he moved forward. And this time, no other sounds came. He walked and walked for what seemed like half an hour, but still found no sign of Peter. That is, until he saw him hiding behind a fallen log. Confused, Heinrich headed over to Peter, and when Peter saw him, he too looked confused. Without asking why he was there, he pulled Heinrich down to the ground from behind the log, and then asked what he thought he was doing.
I heard you call for me. You bade me, and behold.
I did not call for you.
Suddenly, both men smelled something in the air. It smelled of burning wood, and that's when they looked up and saw smoke rising through the trees.
Someone else is out here.
They both looked over the log, but there was nothing of a fire that they could see, no source for the smoke in the distance. Heinrich looked over to Peter and saw that Peter wasn't wearing his coat anymore. There was blood pooling under his arm. He asked him what had happened, and Peter looked at the blood and smiled wryly.
I got knocked down by a very territorial stag. It nicked me and got a point of an antler in my coat. I had to take it off to free myself. I'm glad you found me. Got this thing tracked down, but I lost it here.
It was the most Peter had felt in years that wasn't despair and misery. He had felt alive, and that changed his perspective. He decided in the moments after that his plan to lose Heinrich was foolhardy. Heinrich was astounded by Peter's story, and now even more concerned because of what he had seen earlier. But now he wondered if he should even tell Peter. Would he sound crazier than he had when he told Peter he had heard him call? As he pondered this, Peter suddenly stood up as if he was alarmed. When Heinrich looked to see what it was that had alarmed Peter, he saw that there was a house out there in the darkness. And through the blackness he could see an orange glow illuminating the distance. And from that direction, the supposed fox sound started up again. It shot fear through Heinrich's heart, and he looked to Peter, hoping that seeing his confidence would ease his insecurity. But Peter no longer looked confident. Uncertain, maybe, about the situation.
It's strange. Foxes are skittish and wouldn't normally be that close to humans.
The crying echoed through the air, and the longer it went on, the more human it sounded. It was in distress.
Come on, Heinrich. I don't think that's a fox. Someone might need assistance, and this is the season for goodwill and all that.
They both moved towards the orange glow slowly, ignoring the feeling of danger that hung in the air. As they got closer, it was clear that the crying was indeed coming from the strange black moss-covered log hut. The air around the cabin was more frigid than they had felt in the rest of the forest. Peter looked around at the surrounding area and pointed at the trees. Heinrich looked and immediately saw what Peter meant. All of the trees surrounding the home were dead, and not just dead, but blackened from decay. They looked sick, and Heinrich was given the distinct impression that they had grown that way. It gave him a nauseous feeling in his stomach, and a pit opened up in Peter, a pit that he knew he was going to fall through. It was Christmas Eve, and his jealousy had put a member of his family in danger. They should not be here, and the air let them know it. From the back of the home, they could see a clearing of dying grass in the midst of the snowy ground. Peter walked cautiously, acutely aware of the sounds coming from the blackened home. Upon closer inspection, he saw that what he had once thought was moss was instead slimy black mold, and it appeared to be writhing as if moving of its own sentience. When they had fully entered the clearing, all the sounds of the forest started at once. Animals running around the forest in panic, as if the whole ecosystem just noticed that the hunters were there among them. Birds sounded out warnings. Squirrels ran through the leaves to their trees, and deer were racing through the trees in hopes to make it to their thickets in time. The activity should have been some measure of comfort, and yet both men were put off kilter by it. They had not heard one animal the entire time they were in the forest. Then, in the distance, overpowering the cry and the sounds of the forest, was the sound of a deep, loud call. Peter knew what that sound meant, and even though he had not meant to, he put a name to it.
Narkrat.
Peter was about to fearfully tell Heinrich that they needed to leave because of this death crow. But as soon as he turned to look at him, they both heard the hinges of the hut door creak. The orange glow of the fire inside and the wailing of the infant spilled out into the open night. The crying began to take on a pained quality, as if the infant inside was hurt, and without any concern to his person, Peter raced inside to rescue the baby, with Heinrich following closely behind. Inside this little cabin, trinkets and charms made of wood and dead vegetation were hanging down from the ceiling. It gave the house a musty smell that made their noses scrunch up in revulsion. Near the fireplace was a baby's wooden cradle, and the infantile screaming was pouring out from it. Something about it told Peter he shouldn't get close, and Heinrich followed his lead. Both men were frozen to the spot as they watched the cradle. The sound of the crying changed once again. It became like the crying of a baby being choked. They soon discovered the reason for the changes in the sound, and the cause filled them with a sense of danger and desperation for escape. The cradle began to overflow with a deep, red, thick fountain of putrid blood.
We must leave, Heinrich. We have stumbled into a web made to catch us. We are no longer the hunters, but the hunted.
The words caused Heinrich's breath to catch in his chest, and his legs wanted to collapse. A sob rose in his throat, and then, as it escaped his lips, a great wind blew over the hut. Peter grabbed Heinrich by his coat and pulled him towards the door to leave. However, when he pulled on the door, it would not budge. He pulled as hard as he could. The only thing that happened was that the wooden knob came off in his hand. Laughter came from behind them, wet and malicious. They turned and saw black smoke pour out of the fireplace as if it had traveled down the chimney. Heinrich's confusion and terror was compounded as the smoke started to form into a human body. It began to have the outline of an elderly bent woman, and as it became more defined, Heinrich realized that this was the figure that he had seen in the forest. And sure enough, she was still wearing Peter's winter coat. There were still flecks of his blood just under the arm. When she was fully formed with crisp detail, she looked at the men full on in the eyes. Her face had so many lines it made her look like a dried up and ancient old prune. Her eyes were dim and milking over. Her nose was short and stubby with wide nostrils. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply with a hiss, as if savoring the taste in the air. It gave Heinrich the feeling that he was watching a serpent preview its meal.
Peter, thou dost smell ripe.
She lifted her hand and pointed her gnarled, crooked forefinger at Heinrich.
Does he know? Hast thou told him? If not, I shall, for it will be a sweet seasoning to the meat. Thou wouldst be amazed at how the way of the heart changes the taste, especially betrayal.
The words hit Heinrich's ears, but he didn't understand them. What betrayal? And what was this miserable creature that stopped before them? He looked over to Peter and saw that he was boring holes into the old hag with his eyes. He looked murderous as he reached towards his knife that was sheathed at his hip. The old woman laughed a wicked chuckle and wagged her finger from side to side as Peter pulled his knife.
Now, Peter, that is quite enough.
With the flick of a finger, Peter began to feel immense pain in his arm. He looked down at his forearm and saw something large and thick writhing under his skin. It wrapped itself around his arm and squeezing caused Peter to scream in pain. He dropped down to his knees when Heinrich heard a snap, and then what appeared to be a bulbous head began pushing against Peter's skin, trying to break through. A small bloody tear began to form, and then suddenly a serpent burst violently through. Peter cried out in a mangled hush as if he couldn't feel anything anymore, but reacted anyway. Heinrich was frozen in place and couldn't even comprehend what he was seeing. As the serpent hit the floor, he saw it was not like any snake that he had ever seen. It had no eyes, its skin was cracked as if it was dried out, its mouth opened horizontally with teeth on either side. And what struck Heinrich wasn't the shape of the mouth, but the eerie similarities the creature's teeth had with that of a man. The canines weren't abnormally sharp. In fact, none of the teeth were. If he had seen the teeth in the mouth of a friend, he would not be able to have told the difference. It slithered a bloody trail from Peter's useless dangling arm all the way to the woman's feet. It curled up as if it was some hellish pet, a gift from her lord Satan.
Tell me, Heinrich, did he want to split apart? Shh, I know he did. Because I sang your name with sweetness. I punished thy father-in-law for his wickedness.
She looked at Peter with an accusatory smile and told Heinrich all about how he was going to cause him to die because his wife had lusted after her unsuspecting son-in-law. And the words cut through Peter's haze. He was astonished by this woman's knowledge. He looked over at his companion and could see the belief invading his eyes. They mixed with hurt and confusion.
This cannot be real. This is a wicked lie.
O Heinrich, I have no need to lie to thee. The savor of heartbreak must be true, or it shall strangle the flavor. He did indeed mean to blame a pack of wolves for thy demise.
Heinrich watched as Peter's arm dangled to the floor, uselessly.
You would cast me out to perish in the cold for such a trifling grievance?
Peter turned away and shrank from Heinrich's accusatory question, and without looking up to his eyes, Peter nodded. Before Heinrich could react to the emotions he was feeling, a scream leapt out from the haggard creature that had cornered them and jumped onto Heinrich's back, sinking her teeth deep into his neck. He could feel the sinews in his neck tear from each other, setting his body on fire. The witch moaned at the taste of her meal, savoring the sweet meat that she had tucked into her cheek. Life ebbed from Heinrich's vision as it poured out of his wound.
Just the right measure of heartbreak. I take this offering, good Peter. Thou mayest depart, but thou must inform thy family of what has transpired here, or the consequences shall be swift and grave.
Heinrich reached out with a desperate grasp for Peter to save him. The unnatural night specter bent down and seemed to morph into a hideous creature with razor-sharp teeth before biting down on Heinrich's neck once more, the blood soaking into his white winter coat in a strangely familiar pattern. The hellspawn looked once more to Peter.
Go now! Flee!
It screamed in two distinct and malevolent voices. Peter snapped out of his dazed stupor and crashed through the hut's door. He fell to the ground and found himself in the clearing where they had entered this misadventure. The hut was gone, but still his condition had not changed. His bloody arm still hung uselessly by his side. Steam was rising out of the wound when it hit the cold wintry air. He stumbled through the forest, dazed from his painful experience. Heinrich's screams still echoed through the air, but the sound changed. It deepened into almost a roar, and Peter knew the roar was for him, though he couldn't explain why. He quickened his pace through the darkness, looking for familiar ground to point his way home. Each step brought pain to his arm as he jostled over fallen branches and foliage. He finally found a path for home when chaos broke through the night sounds. From behind him in the distance came the cacophony of sound that was from the earth splitting open. Screams of tortured souls filled the sky, and he could see an orange haze forming behind him as he went. The ground began to rumble, which caused Peter to stumble against a blackened tree. This caused him pause. He was well away from the black trees of the clearing, but he turned to look behind him, and his heart began to beat against his chest. In the distance, he could see one of those trees, and from it emerged Heinrich's mangled form, standing in the orange glow of the chasm that had opened. Suddenly, tendrils shot out from the tree to grab Heinrich and wrap themselves around him, changing his form into a hideous, demonic entity. Ram horns protruded from out front of his head and wound towards the back. His face became elongated in a snout, and what was once Heinrich was now transformed. A long, ash-covered red winter coat, as if made for royalty, appeared over the monster's form. Right before the coat closed over its shape, Peter saw that Heinrich's legs were now covered in hair and ended in hooves. It raised its head and let out an inhuman scream. Wind rushed over Peter's head, and the stars were blotted from the sky before magically reappearing. He realized immediately what it was, and his mind was on the verge now of collapsing. The Knockrop had returned. Its giant, black pinion wings, its hard, raven stare. Without giving it another moment of thought, he took off from his spot. He ran as fast as his injured, exhausted body would carry him. He was horribly faint and felt as if his body was moving independently from himself. Through the forest, Peter could see the incandescent flame inside his house, and he broke into a desperate stride for home. Branches, like claws, ripped at his eyes and the skin of his cheek. Just before he broke through the forest, he heard the Knockrop call out in a blast that caused the tops of the trees to nearly snap free from the rest of the trunk. Peter tripped over a large branch and fell face first into 2 feet of snow, and the impact jostled his arm and made him scream out in agony. The air seemed to answer his scream with one of its own. It was a hellish sound that caused Peter's ears to bleed. It was as if 1,000 people were being tortured, and all in one voice cried out to pierce the veil between the worlds. Using his useful arm, Peter picked himself up and followed the old tracks he and Heinrich had made when they began this nightmarish journey. His legs were trying to seize up and quit functioning, but he pushed through with determination to get home and warn his family. As he approached the wooden house, he could hear the muffled singing of his daughter and wife, and relief washed over him as the fiery hue of the hearth poured out of the window onto the snow. Urgently, he pulled open the door and flopped onto the floor of the home. His daughter howled at the sight of her bloodied father, sprawled out onto the floor, and his wife rushed to his side with a frantic cry.
Peter, my love, what has happened to you?
She cried out as she dropped to the floor and inspected his ripped-apart face and mangled arm. She was openly weeping as she gazed on his distorted countenance. So he raised his healthy hand to her face to hold her cheek against his palm. His voice returned to him, but it was cracked and dry.
You must run.
His wife stared into his brutalized eyes, and his daughter joined them where he lay.
Father! Where's Heinrich?
His daughter's face screamed in desperate pleas for answers, but he did not know what to give her. He was cut off by the sound of something large flying over the house. His heart sank with realization that it was too late, and from the roof came a thud of something landing on it. The woman looked at the ceiling as they kneeled beside Peter.
Go! Go! You must run! Do not go into the forest, but run as fast as you can to the nearest village. I'm sorry. I have brought such misery to you.
He wailed at them, but they just looked at him with fear. He tried to push his wife up, but his strength barely came to him enough to raise his arm. His eyes widened once they all heard the heavy footsteps walk unevenly across the roof. They hobbled over the roof towards the chimney, and all in their family followed the steps with their eyes. They were hyper-focused on the fireplace just below the chimney, as snow and soot extinguished the flame and the light. Peter could feel his throat tightening as the smoke filled the house in an eerie, familiar way. An animal growl cut through the smoke and rang off the walls of the cottage. A step came out from the direction of the fire.
The consequences shall be swift and grave.
Through the dissipating smoke, a figure that resembled a monstrous goat stood glowering down at him, holding a molding red leather sack. Peter pulled at his wife's dress to try and lift himself up, but when she saw what hellish nightmare had made it into her home, she screamed and fell beside Peter, having fainted at the sight of the red-robed evil. The creature stepped a cloven hoof towards Peter, and she screamed out and jumped between the monster and her injured father. His daughter had no recognition of this abomination in her eyes, and yet it looked at her tenderly. It purred in contentment and comfort as it caressed her auburn hair. It touched her tenderly until she could no longer stand its attentions and shrank away from it in revulsion. As she shrank away, Peter saw the beast's countenance change into complete savagery as his daughter's rejection really took hold. The vestiges of Heinrich shedding away to be replaced with malice and hate. His daughter turned to run away in haste, but was stopped by the creature who had a hold of her long auburn hair. With one good yank, it slammed her to the floor, hard enough to splinter the wood. She lay there screaming in agony, back bent as if broken, and all Peter could do was watch. The monster pressed a hoof on her throat and then stared mockingly into Peter's eyes as it closed her airway. Peter heard a small snap, and then the hoof was removed and the daughter panically grasped out, trying to claw the air to her lungs before she died in front of him. No! And the monster began to chuckle as his wife screamed from a broken heart and fear, and that's when its attention turned to her. This woman who had lusted for the man it had been. And part of Peter felt something he hadn't expected when this mythic force saw her. It was a sense of satisfaction, or maybe just twisted justice. The man she had wanted would now be her undoing. Hadn't this truly been what he wanted? To have his wife punished? Was his Christmas wish truly being granted? He regretted everything. As if the creature could hear his thoughts, it turned on a swivel and placed its hoof just above his knee. Suddenly, it thrust it down, and Peter felt the hoof go through his leg and connect to the floor before he felt the searing pain and numbness having his leg dismembered in such a brutal fashion. He reached down, screaming in agony, as the monster once again turned towards his wife, and she screamed as she cowered in the corner. It made no tender embrace for her like it had his daughter. Instead, it extended its claw and penetrated her stomach through the navel. The squelch mixed with her choked scream of pain made Peter want to vomit, but he had nothing in him. He was spent and woozy. Laying his head on the floor, he was resigned to his fate. He heard his wife screaming out for him to come for her, but he couldn't. And at last, there was her last scream that was cut off with a whack. And then he heard the sound of rolling to his left, and when he looked, he saw a pair of pale green eyes staring at him, wide with fear. He called her name as he turned to face her, but found that he was only speaking with a head. His family was dead. He had no one any longer. This alone was cause for him to die, and he was ready.
No, not yet.
He heard the creature speak in its rough demonic tone. It breathed in deeply, reminding Peter of a serpent, and then spoke once again.
Just the right amount of heartbreak.
With that, the beast grabbed Peter by his remaining leg and dragged him over to the blood-stained sack. And with the sack in hand, he dropped Peter's leg and went around to his head, stuffing him into the sack head first. Once Peter was in the sack, darkness was his only reality. The smell of death and decay surrounded him as he settled into the sack, unable to flee or move. He felt himself being lifted into the air and then moving rapidly up. All of a sudden, he landed hard on a surface he could not see. The last thing he knew of the world was a swift wind and a deafening sound of a bird call. And that's our story, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. It is 1:28 in the morning right now, Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas, everyone. Now, if you're wondering why I'm doing this, it's because we recorded this yesterday. And through trying to get all the sounds and things situated, I deleted the entire episode. So I had to stay up late again to re-record the episode with the sound. And I hope that it was an enjoyable experience for you. You know, it's strange. The house was silent. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And Santa ends that whole entire thing by saying, Merry Christmas to all.
And to all a good night.